Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm trying really hard not to laugh through my nose and follow that. I'm Tina Yeager. I'm a speaker, a podcast host of the podcast Flourishment. I'm author of the new release, Beautiful Warrior, Finding Victory Over the Lies Formed Against You. I'm a mentor, a life coach, and a licensed mental health counselor, which I think might be needed.
I am Molly Jo Riley. I am author of the romantic location mystery novel Nola, curator of the Unemployment Cookbook, and moderator of this very interesting podcast we like to call First in Fiction, or Aaron Has Lost His Mind Again.
You all dared me to do the podcast like this, so here it is.
I think technically Aaron said, I want to do the podcast like this. So then I said, I double dog dare you. And here we are.
Okay.
So
I think I'm done with it, though.
Okay.
I'm done with that now.
Probably a good thing. We don't want to spook out any new viewers. So a few housekeeping tips. If you would pretty please share this video on your social media sites. Follow us on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. We have a First in Fiction podcast page on Facebook as well as on Twitter. So please follow us, give us some likes, give us some comments, and leave messages for us of ask the authors, what is it that you want to know?
Indeed. Speaking of what do you want to know?
Good segue. No, do that one in the mic. Do that one in the mic.
Speaking of, what were we speaking of?
I don't know.
What do you
Things
want to know? Oh, yes. Speaking of what you want to know, I feel like somebody's going to meme me. They're just going to screen cap this, and I'm going to be a meme forever.
Oh, you are now. Now you are.
I'm pretty sure that I will pass that on to your social media manager and see what we can do.
The picture of professionalism. All right, enough of that. Speaking of what you want to know and asking the authors, one of the more common questions that we as authors get is, well, we get a lot of questions, but they all kind of revolve around the same thing. It's the language of the discipline. It's learning the language of the industry. We like to throw around terms as writers and editors and agents and publishers and all that kind of stuff. And we tend to forget that sometimes people don't know what they mean. So tonight's podcast, that's what we are going to look at. And so, Molly, I'm going to toss it back over to you. And you've got a list of some terms here that I don't know why I'm waving my hands like this. That
is also going to be a meme. I just want you to know.
Oh, good times. So a list of terms here that are good for new writers to know.
Yeah, the reason that I suggested this topic was because as I still consider myself a fairly new writer, especially in comparison with Aaron and his dad, Al, and many of the other people that we associate and rub elbows with over at the conferences. And when my first 2 or 3 conferences, people were using these terms that they assumed I knew because I was in attendance, and I didn't. And it took a couple of tries and, behind the scenes whispering of what do they mean by this or that for me to understand what was going on. So I wanted to kind of breach the topic and bring up some terms that I found that I think would be helpful to share with new writers. So the first term, and some of these may sound basic, but some of them really aren't. For instance, the first one I have on my list is genre. Now I knew in the beginning, ultimately genre means what style are you writing? But I thought that's where and what style do you write? Oh, well, is it romantic, flourishy, descriptive words? Is it more action? And that's where the discrepancy was. Is it romance or is it action? Those were, when I first started, that's what I thought genre was. But obviously they're quite different. So Tina, Aaron, tell us what the difference are.
When we use the term genre, it's a term that seems to me to be driven by the publishing industry, which is simply a question of what shelf do I put this on at the bookstore. Readers want to know what they're going to be getting. If they go to the romance section and they pull out, some sort of hardcore sci-fi that's talking about, orbiting the moon this, many times and blah. It's not what they want. If they, conversely, if they want a very detailed, descriptive sci-fi, and they pick up a romance, it's going to be a little disappointing. And so when we talk about genre, what we're talking about it is what category. What category does your book or work fit into? And the two primary ones, of course, are going to be fiction and nonfiction, but then there are several different genres within each of those: memoir versus biography versus autobiography versus personal essay, reflective essay, investigative journalism, and all those types of things on the nonfiction side. On the fiction side, you have sci-fi, romance, fantasy, action, thriller. Yes, there's a difference between the two. Thriller and horror. Yes, there's a difference between those two. And so it really kind of deals with those little nuances and discrepancies. Is it a mystery? Is it a cozy mystery? Is it a thriller mystery? And your book more than likely fits multiple descriptions. You probably have a romantic story thread running through your sci-fi. Okay, but you still have spaceships and ray guns, so we're going to put you in the sci-fi, not in the romance. You know what I'm saying? You have an elf and a dwarf. We're going to put you in fantasy, even though it's it's really a romance. But that's just what people who are looking for elves and dwarfs are going to go to the fantasy section, and they don't mind reading love stories between elves and dwarves. That's fine for them. And so it's really just that kind of a thing. It also, as from a writer's perspective, helps you to pitch your book. You really need to know what your genre is, even if it's a little bit of both. Even if it's a little sci-fi, a little fantasy, you have to be able to pitch it to publishers in such a way that they know confidently where this book is going to be put on the shelf, or realistically now, what heading or subheading it's going to go under on Amazon, so that people can find it, and what keywords and hashtags they're going to put to go along with your novel, so that people who are looking for it are going to find it. And so that's really what genre is referring to, is the category, the large category into which your book most clearly fits.
And these categories can change depending on what's in fashion and what's out of fashion.
Yes.
When I wrote a urban fantasy was the term during the time I was writing it, but when I was ready to pitch it to publishers, they had just shifted that subgenre to be called now contemporary fantasy instead of urban fantasy. So those things can change. In order to find out where your book falls, you can cheat by checking online with booksellers and finding books that are just like yours or close to yours in nature, and then finding all the search terms that are listed for those books. What are the genres that are listed for that book and the search terms on that site? That can kind of help you narrow down what genre you belong in.
Very cool. Next.
Yeah.
Everybody's quiet, so I'm okay. The next one that I have on my list is setting. And again, in the beginning, when I first started writing NOLA, I thought setting was strictly New Orleans, but it's much more than that, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, setting is really the time, the place, the circumstances.
Aaron, talk closer into your mic. Not
Setting.
that close.
I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about setting. Setting refers to the time, the place, the circumstances of your story. It's more than just what city it takes place in. It's it's the hotel in which your protagonist is staying. It is the chapel in which they're getting married. It can be all of these things, but it also has to do with the time. For example, if you write a story that's set in Birmingham, Alabama, 2019, okay. If you write that same story, but it's 1950, well, now Birmingham, Alabama looks a little bit different. So that type of thing, in The Great Gatsby, it's the West Egg, the East Egg. It's, you know, that kind of roaring 20s, kind of fast-paced lifestyle, you know, live rich, die young, whatever it is. That all of that kind of stuff that's going on. It's Pearl Harbor in World War II. This is kind of what we're referring to with setting, is we want to set the stage, not just the city, but also the room in which your characters are having their conversation. I remember reading a novel, I won't say which one it is, and getting to the end and having no idea what city this was supposed to take place in, because there was so little attention paid to the setting and what did it look like, and how did it impact the story. Setting should always have some sort of impact on the story, and your readers should be able to clearly say that this story takes place here at this time.
Tina, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you covered that one pretty thoroughly, so I don't have anything to add.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Now, you have to have your eyes look at the camera when you're leaning into the mic.
Is this too much?
That right there is a graphic. Okay, thanks. Tina, then we'll throw the next one to you for first response. What is POV?
Oh, and deep POV. That's another one that can be really.
What are those?
So deep POV is not, you know, something like Aaron leaning deep into the microphone or anything like that. Deep POV is point of view.
Okay.
So, or deep point of view, where you're deeply immersed in that character's point of view. It's making sure that your reader sees everything from the eyes of that specific character. So being in the POV, the correct POV, it should be that main one POV, one point of view per scene. You don't want to do head hopping, which is another term that you wouldn't understand if you were a new writer that people tend to throw around. And that's going from one person's point of view to the next person's point of view and back again, and having no consistent perspective in that scene.
Now, what types of POV are there other than deep POV?
Well, deep POV is usually one of the subtypes of many POVs. You can have first person, which is you're speaking, I walked into the room, I sat down. That's first person point of view. You can have third person point of view. She walked into the room, she sat down, or he walked into the room and he sat down, or you can use the names of the characters. That would be third person. And you can use third person limited, you can use third person omniscient, and omniscient is not typically used in modern literature any longer. It was something that was done in times past that's no longer really in fashion. So if you're tempted to do that, really rethink whether you think your publisher might accept that. Omniscient is seeing from the point of view of God. You see everything and you can see inside of everyone's head. So now we call that head hopping, or it's often looked at as a sign of someone who is new at writing. So it's something to avoid if you don't have a good reason as a very experienced writer to be able to pull that off. And then there is, help me out with some of the other ones. I'm blanking.
Is there a second person point of view?
Yeah, I mean, nobody does that, though. It would be kind of weird.
I've done it.
You've done it second person?
Yeah.
How does that look?
It's exactly that. So the second person is fun. It's typically done in shorter fiction. So flash fiction, short stories, you'll see stuff like that. It's typically not done in longer works, but it really reads very much like first person, except that it uses you as the pronoun. I've kind of played with a book, novel. I've started it and I've kind of come back to it time and again. Have never quite completed it, but it's in second person because it's told from the perspective of a stand-up comedian.
And not someone doing a psychotic rant.
No.
Which would also be a way to do.
And I've actually seen that. I've read YA novels that where the killer is speaking to their, their victim, and so it's a way for the author to create some tension.
I'm sorry, did you say that was a YA novel you've seen that done?
Yes. Yeah, I
Okay.
read a YA novel where that was done, and I used to read the YA thrillers and the, all that kind of stuff. I was big into Caroline B. Cooney. I don't know if anybody knows who she is now, but Diana H-O-H. You read a bunch of her stuff too when I was a kid. So I don't know why I got into that, but I did. Anyhow, so you'll see it occasionally, but rarely. Most editors really don't like it. Most readers don't like it. It's high risk, high reward. I don't know if it'll fly. If I finish my novel, I don't know if anybody's going to take it, but it's going to be fun to write. So I think you've covered most of them. So first person, third person, omniscient, limited, and close, or I call close is what I use to describe deep POV. The thing with omniscient is, you're right, it's typically frowned upon unless you're Stephen King writing Under the Dome. That's an omniscient, a lot of head hopping. That was published because he's Stephen King.
Lucky guy.
Yeah, there was another one. Marcus Zuzak's The Book Thief is written in first person omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, first person omniscient. That's a thing. But it's written from the point of view of death, which is how they get away with that. Same with The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold, written in first person omniscient, because it's told from the perspective of somebody who's passed, somebody who's died. And so they're able to, in the fiction, able to kind of empathize or go into what people are thinking and feeling. And so it's an interesting flavor, but you have to have a very compelling reason to do that. You have to have a very compelling reason to do that. If you want to play it safe, and if you're a new writer, that's probably what you want to do, stick with first person and or third person. Those are your best bets. Third person close is typically what's used in contemporary literature.
Yes. If you're starting out, third person limited point of view is really the safest place to start. But as an exercise to deepen the point of view of your protagonist, you can switch into first person and draft some of your scenes from first person point of view, just to try to deepen the point of view of your character, and then switch it back into third person point of view.
Yeah.
That is you're right, a good exercise. Good exercise for that. All right, next term, what is a proposal?
You want that one, Tina?
Yes, I'm going to do that before you get down and do that like weird voice thing with the proposal thing. Because that would be just really
too late. It's too late now.
Okay. So proposals is referring to manuscript proposals. So you have a manuscript. It is not a book yet. You are trying to submit a business proposal, is basically what this is, to try to get a publishing company to consider your book a good risk for their company to create a product, a book that they can sell. And you can also do a manuscript proposal even if you're self-publishing, to help with your sales plan for selling it yourself. So you can look at, there's all kinds of pieces that go into that. You're going to look at the chapters, your elevator pitch, which is that quick ad for your book that tells everything about it in a few sentences. And you'll also go into all of the chapters that have, in a nonfiction book, all of the chapters that are included and what each chapter is about. You'll have a summary. If it's a fiction book, you might have chapter summaries or just one long summary. But you'll also have a bio and why you are the right person to write this book, and a sales plan of all the marketing that you plan to do and all the connections that you have and the places where you are going to be able to make this book successful. So there are components to that, and you should look at those online and make sure you do it correctly. Because the first time I did one, I found the wrong one online, got to a writer's conference and gave it to an agent, and he pushed it back at me and said, "This is not a manuscript proposal." And I thought to myself, what am I going to do with the other 14 minutes of my meeting? So that can be interesting. So be prepared when you go to a writer's conference. to have a manuscript proposal that fits the right formatting for the people that are accepting it.
Best way to do that is to go to the website of the publisher that you're planning on pitching it to. You might have to have one predominant proposal, and then you can tweak it for different publishers. Certain publishers want to see certain things. Some publishers care about summaries, chapter summaries, some don't. And so it's important to know exactly what those publishers are looking for when you pitch to them. If you have an agent, just work with your agent. Your agent will be able to tell you what you need and all that kind of stuff. But that's what we're referring to when we talk about a proposal. It's as you said, it's more of a business proposal than anything. I'd like to write this book, and you provide a lot of evidence to the publisher that says, I've already started it or I've completed it. This is what it looks like. This is who's going to buy it. This is, other books that are like it. This is how I plan on marketing it, all those types of things, because a publisher wants to know that if they spend money putting this book on the market, that it is going to sell and that they will make their money back. That's their primary concern.
Yes. And the acquisitions agent, if they like your proposal, will be using that as their tool to try to get your book through the publishing board at their company. Your proposal is going to be what makes the difference between one person at the company liking it and the whole board accepting it and allowing it to be published.
Indeed.
That makes perfect sense. Our next term then is, what is a query letter? I know that that is part of, do you query before or after a proposal?
Definitely before.
Yeah, before. Query letters are usually more for agents, not always for publishers. If you have an agent, then they can do query letters with the proposal and send it in, or they can query on your behalf. If you don't have an agent, you'll probably need to query beforehand. And this is a very short letter. Again, look at the guidelines, look at what the publisher wants to see. And it usually takes the shape of an email now. It's a professional business email. Proofread it before you send it. That is going to give some of the nitty-gritty of your project. This is the novel I'm writing. It's this genre, this many words. Here is the hook. I've got a devout readership of, I've got 15,000 followers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Whatever it is, my last book sold 20,000 copies. Whatever it is that you want to say, that is going to make you look publishable. And if interested, please let me know, and I can send you a full proposal. But again, each publisher is going to want to see things that are unique to them. So double check where you're sending the query letter and what information specifically they want to see.
Yes, and you can use those for articles as well. If you're trying to query a magazine editor to see if they would be willing to accept an article, which is something that you would want to have done before you write a manuscript proposal, because that'll be part of your publishing credits in your proposal.
Ooh, I like that.
Indeed.
That's a good recommendation. So we've talked a little bit about agents, publishers, and editors. What are those specific roles? How do they differentiate? And I know that sounds like a basic question, but some people will do 2 or 3 of those labels in one person or entity. Others are strictly editors. So what is the general difference between the 3, an agent, a publisher, and an editor?
This is a great question for Tessa, since she is almost all of them, I believe. But an agent is somebody who's going to work with you. They are somebody who is connected in the publishing world, who will query publishers on your behalf, who will submit your proposal on your behalf, who will track your submissions on your behalf, who will give you career advice, these types of things. They represent your work. And they're important because as writers, we can sometimes become very, very good at writing, but we're not always good on the business side. And so agents can do that. They will look over your contracts before you sign them. They become your professional manager, for lack of a better term. If you have any disputes with your publisher, your agent will handle that. They are basically your business front. They're your business manager, for lack of a better term. Whereas a publisher is the one who's theoretically paying you for your manuscript, or if they're not paying you, they're paying you royalties for the publication of it. They are the ones who will take your proposal, they'll take your manuscript, they typically, depending on who you get, will pay for the manuscript to be edited. They'll put you in touch with an editor and help you through that process. They're the ones who are, putting the book up on Amazon and Create Space and all these different types of things for you. Interior book design, book covers. They are the ones who are responsible for creating the book as a product and printing and sending out and shipping and all that kind of stuff. And depending on the size of the publisher, they're either smaller presses are utilizing Amazon and Create Space and things of that nature to drive that. Whereas other publishers, bigger houses that have a little more money, that have been in the industry a little bit longer, they've got their own printing presses and everything like that. So they don't necessarily do everything through Amazon. And lastly, an editor is somebody who's going to look at your manuscript, who's going to help you fix your mistakes, not fix them for you, but help you fix your mistakes and give you some professional advice on how to strengthen your manuscript and your writing. So that's it in a nutshell. Tina, did you have something else?
Not everybody is going to need an agent. If you plan to have a career in traditional publishing, you will need an agent. If you are simply publishing one book, you might not. If you are going to do self-publishing, you probably don't need an agent. So make sure that you understand whether or not you need an agent. And if you do, if you are looking into traditional publishing, it is incredibly helpful to have an agent. So you'll want to query those first. Sometimes you can end up with a contract offer from a publisher first, and that will help you get an agent. They'll be happy to represent you once you have that contract. So they don't always come in order exactly. So, and editors can be within the publishing house, or they can be freelance editors. So there are different kinds of editors out there. So know what kind of editor you need. I recommend always getting an editor to work on your manuscript before you submit it to the publishing house, for two reasons. It's going to look better, first of all, when you submit it, and be more likely to get it accepted if you've had it professionally edited first. But also, the publishers are only going to do so much editing. So if it's polished beforehand and then they polish it a second time, your book, your final book, is going to look that much better when it's in its final print form. So you stand a better chance of having a great product if you do more layers of editing.
Indeed. And that's about all the time that we have for tonight. So, Molly, anything else before we sign off?
No, appreciate the feedback, terms that I have learned to learn and understand. So thanks for sharing that with our new listeners.
Sure thing. Yeah. Tina, anything else?
No, I think I've used up all the time.
Well, okay then. If you're looking for us throughout the week, you can find me at aarongansky.com. You can find Tina at tinayeager.com and Molly Jo Reilly at frankly-my-dear-mojo.com. So thank you again for listening, and until next time, good writing.